a collective Tisha B'Av and there's a personal Tisha B'Av. And he wrote to me about his personal Tisha B'Av. He was a boy whom I have met a few times in the past. He comes from a very, very prominent family, a very distinguished family, a very good family, that perfect family, and very successful on many levels in the Jewish community. And he went to a very good yeshiva. And for 3 years, he was molested in that yeshiva, abused. And when he shared it with people on the top, they either didn't believe it or didn't respond to it the way they did. And it shattered his life. So he writes to me a personal email and he writes, and I quote word for word, "What I mourn on Tisha B'Av. I mourn the loss of control of my body. I mourn the loss of my childhood. I mourn the loss of my teen years. I mourn the loss of joy. I mourn the loss of happiness. I mourn the loss of peace. I mourn the loss of self. I mourn the loss of trust. I mourn the loss of intimacy. I mourn the loss of relationship. I mourn the loss of freedom. I mourn the loss of love. I mourn the lack of family." His family also didn't believe what happened. "I mourn the lack of support. I mourn the lack of appetite. I mourn the lack of caring. I mourn the lack of understanding. I mourn the lack of empathy. I mourn the lack of awareness. I mourn the lack of connection. I mourn the lack of touch. I mourn the loss of self-confidence. I mourn the loss of positive body image. I mourn the loss of autonomy. I mourn the loss of an inner child. I mourn the loss of a clear mind. I mourn the loss of blissfulness. I mourn the loss of trust in a community. I mourn the lack of seeing God. I mourn the lack of seeing good. I mourn the lack of seeing positive. I mourn the lack of seeing optimism. I mourn the lack of seeing hope. I mourn the lack of seeing me. I pray for the end of trauma. I pray for the end of pain. I pray for the end of loneliness. I pray for the end of sexual fears. I pray for the end of PTSD in my life. I pray for the end of my nightmares. I pray for the end of my codependency. I pray for the end of my suffering. I pray for the end of being single and alone. I pray for the completion of healing. I pray for the completion of redemption. I pray for the completion of love. I pray for the completion of happiness. I pray for the completion of family. I pray for the completion of self. I pray to God, please let me be able to love you as much as you love me." Some people may be hearing this and saying, "Oh, stop being dramatic, Rabbi why? And stop being dramatic, whoever wrote this email." But that only comes because you are clueless. You are really clueless. You may be thinking so. How do I know you may be thinking so? Because once upon a time, I also thought so. So I don't judge you. I also thought so. Stop being so dramatic. But he's actually not dramatic. He's actually being less than dramatic. Because what he's describing about himself is a truth that happened to him. This is what he's experiencing. This is his perception of life. This is his experience of Tisha B'Av. And what is the psalmist telling to this young man, to this young, beautiful soul, who at the end of all of his trauma says, "God, allow me to love you as much as you love me." I know deep down that this is not the case. If he wouldn't know deep down it's not the case, he wouldn't mourn. You mourn for something that you lost. If you never had it, there's nothing to mourn. Comes the Chassam Sofer and says, Kol hamis'abel al Yerushalayim zoiche v'roya b'simchas. Whoever mourns for Jerusalem merits and sees his joy. How can it be that 1,900 years later, Jews are mourning for a home that's not been here for 2,000 years? As we sat last night and this morning and read 4 chapters of a book called Eichel Lamentations, written by Jeremiah, the prophet, Yirmiyahu HaNavi, around 2,500 years ago. We're reading it 2,500 years ago. And Jews remember it and learn about it and are nostalgic about it. And the level of sincerity is not as relevant as the fact that there are millions of Jews who think about it, who pray for it, who cry for it, who talk about it. Ask the Chassam Sofer, how did such a thing happen? At some point in history, the Jewish people should have said, it's time to move on. Shuvi, Shuvi Hashulamis. The Pasuk says in Shir HaShirim, the sages say, come, Try out other things. It's time to move on. Forget it. Time to close a lid. Yet the Jews don't forget Yerushalayim. They don't forget the Beis HaMikdash. They don't forget Mashiach. They don't forget redemption. Says the Chassam Sofer, how? And the answer is, because it's not dead, it's alive. If it would have been dead, there would be closure. But it's alive. If it's not alive physically, it's alive spiritually in the hearts and the souls and the minds of Knesset Yisrael. It's alive. The very fact that Jews mourn for Yerushalayim. Right now you're meriting to see the joy. Right now you're meriting to see something that's vibrant, that's pulsating, that lives in the history and the story, in the daily life of the Jewish people, men, women, and children in the Holy Land and the whole world. And therefore you know that physically it will also be rebuilt. It's already now that you see it's alive. There's a vitality within the Jewish world. It's true when anybody mourns for something. When anybody mourns for something, it means there's something to mourn for. There's something you miss. There's something that was part of you. This young man says, I mourn. You mourn for these things because they're there, because they're part of you. Somebody tried to rob you from them. Somebody tried to deprive you from them. Somebody did rob you from them. But, here is the real truth. And that is that just like by Yosef, nobody can really snuff out your true power, your true confidence, your true love, your true trust, your true infinite potential. Why? Because you are a piece of the divine, and just like Hashem, Ani, Hashem, Lo Shanisi, Va'atem b'nei Yaakov lo chilisam. Just like nobody can destroy God, nobody can destroy your invincible chelik elekam imal. And I tell you, young man, that even though you look at yourself as a little seed, shriveled up, emaciated, lifeless, numb, dead, they took out all the sap and vitality of it. Certainly nobody nurtured it into a seed that will blossom. I tell you that you will be able to find that invincible seed that was planted. It was planted in many difficult places. It went through many challenges. But that seed will blossom. Great fruits. And will become a source of tremendous healing, awareness, integrity, truth, and inspiration to so many people. I just bless you that you should be able to see it as clearly as I see it. You should be able to see it in yourself as clearly as I could see it in your very delicious and moving and powerful email that you sent me on the night of Tisha B'Av Tov Tes. And if you want a vivid example of this story, I'm looking at this image that I assume many of you saw last week. A woman, 104 years old, is celebrating her 104th birthday. Her name is Shoshana Ovitz. And her children say, Ma, what would you like for your 104th birthday? And she says, I want all my descendants to come to the Kaisel HaMa'aravi, to the Western Wall. And it's not an easy job because there are, thank God, many descendants and many live outside of Israel. But last week they managed to gather together 400 of Shoshana Ovitz's descendants, Ken Yirbu, to be together and daven together at Srid Makom Mikdashenu, at the remnant, the last remnant of the Beis HaMikdash, the Kaisel HaMa'aravi, for her 104th birthday. And I'm looking at the picture that the family took. And I know that there are approximately 500 descendants. But they managed to get 400. And you look at that picture. And Shoshana is right there in the middle, sitting in a wheelchair, holding the hand of a 6-year-old great-great-grandchild with beautiful, curly, gekreisel tepeyas. It's a family mostly of Vishnitzer Hasidim. And the grandson, who's around 6 years old, is looking at the 104-year-old great-great-grandmother, and their eyes gaze at each other. And I have a flashback in my mind of this Shoshana just 76 years ago, or 74 years ago. She was in Auschwitz. Her father was gassed. She saw her mother snatched away by Dr. Joseph Mengele in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the infamous doctor who made his vicious, brutal, sadistic experiments on hundreds or thousands of Jewish inmates, snatched her mother away, murdered. Her entire family murdered. She survives Auschwitz alone, this Shoshana. Did you ever see the pictures of the Jewish inmates in Auschwitz on the day of liberation, January 27th, 1945, when the Soviets liberated Auschwitz? Actually, soon there'll be a lecture by Rav Schlesinger, right? Huh? He gave it already. Who davens with us in the morning, every morning was in Auschwitz. You ever saw the pictures? I have no better description than an emaciated seed. No skin left, skeletons, Muslim, mamish skeletons they looked like. You could see the bones. You look at a seed, a human seed, it's emaciated. It's shriveled. It's the closest thing to lifeless. And so many did die on the day of liberation. This was Shoshana. And 7.5 decades later, she has 500 descendants. And celebrating her 104th birthday at the Kaisal HaMa'aravi, at the Western Wall, in our eternal homeland, near the place of the Beis HaMikdash, 7.5 decades later, from a shriveled seed, a matriarch of a family of hundreds of descendants, proud Jews, breathing their history, their heritage. She came out of Auschwitz, she met her husband, she met a young man, Doivovitz. Doivovitz lost a wife and 4 daughters in the gas chambers and crematoriums of Auschwitz. And they met and they marry and they go to Austria to look for family. They find nobody. They come illegally to Israel. They move to Haifa. She's a seamstress. He's an owner. He opens a store. She helps him in the store. They have a few children, and 7.5 decades later, a whole nation surrounds her with so much love, with so much grace, as this seed blossomed Ki Adam Eitz Hasad, into the most incredible harvest and the most incredible fruits of children, grandchildren, great-children, great-great-grandchildren in the hundreds. If that is not a miracle, what is a miracle? How did she do it? How did so many of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents do it? How is this young man doing it? This person wrote me. So many of you do it in your own little Tisha B'Avs or big Tisha B'Avs that you experienced? How did Shoshana's shriveling seed blossom into such delicious fruit? And the answer is, never for a moment did she fail to remember that she does not belong in the abyss, but that she was planted. And never for a moment did she not feel the presence of the water, of the tears of her parents, her siblings, her grandparents, her great-grandparents, all the generations which nurtured that seed and allowed it to see itself as a seed that's destined to blossom. So Shir HaMalos, when the psalmist wants to describe redemption, B'shuv Hashem es Shivas Tzion, says, Hayinu kechalmim. We were like dreamers. We were like dreamers. Somehow he takes us back to the story of Yosef. He wants us to remember the story of Yosef. Yosef's redemption as a paradigm, as a prototype of our redemption, but particularly Hayinu kechalmim, a dream. Why a dream? The Brisker Rav once said, what's the difference between a dream and reality? You know, some of us have nightmares at night. Some of you may have nightmares of being in the Holocaust. Some of you may have nightmares of being in other dangerous situations. And in the dream, it feels so real. It feels real. But when you wake up, you're still under the spell of the dream. And you're like, oh my God, am I alive? But 5 minutes later, usually, it's like, it's a dream. It's a dream. It's gone. But what about somebody who actually experienced the abuse? I can't tell this to this person. What happened to somebody who had the trauma? What about that person who was thrown into a pit? He wakes up in the morning, he wants it to be a dream, but it's not a dream. Go tell a Holocaust survivor it was a dream. It was not a dream. I dreamt that I was in the Holocaust. I dreamt it more than once. But I wake up in the morning, I'm a free man, and there's food waiting for me. But I look at another person who lived decades before me, only 2 mortgages, the Holocaust happened only 2 mortgages ago. Not a long time ago. He or she wakes up in the morning. Some of you had parents who woke up screaming in the middle of the night because it was not a dream. Shir HaMalos b'shuv Hashem es shiva siyeh hayinu kecholme. What is redemption in the Jewish world? What does redemption look like? Hayinu kecholmim. I cannot always rewrite my past. We cannot always rewrite our past. You may have been through difficult challenges that you can't get rid of. But the power of the human soul is that you are capable of becoming a truly free human being to the point that the trauma affects you to the degree that a dream affects the person who dreamt about it. You find the courage and the infinite divine resources within yourself to be able to contextualize your trauma and pain within a story that you choose to tell. Was I cast into the abyss, or was I planted in the earth in order to bring light and sustenance to the world? What happened? I know that I was in the earth. But what is the meaning of that? Is the meaning of that I was thrown into the abyss and I am forever a loser, a shmata, a valueless, lonely, dejected person looking for connection, looking for love, looking for happiness, looking for bliss, looking for my inner child, looking for my God? Or can I look at myself and say, the real I, the real true I, which is one with infinity, one with the divine, is not shattered. It cannot be shattered. No abuser in the world can take that away from you, and therefore at this moment I'm going to operate from a place of invincibility, of complete power and confidence and strength, not because I don't know how to cry, but because I cried to the point that I can now discover an inner core that remains unshattered. Hayinu kecholmim. The Jewish people will emerge from exile not as a traumatized, broken, dejected people who are free but really never free. We'll be able to look at our pain. You could look at your pain and say, Kecholm, of course it was real and of course it was very painful. But ultimately, it will not define me. I will define it. It will not define me. I will not remain a slave to it. I will define it. It will not put me into its context. I will put it into my context. I will put it into a context of freedom, of joy, of geula, of redemption. I will define it. I won't let it define me. And how will I define it? I will define it as a springboard and as a tool of healing, of awareness, of communication, of maybe helping others and reaching out to others. Hayinu kecholmim, oz yimolei schayk pinu. Then our mouths will be filled with laughter. Yosef knew how to cry, but therefore he also knew how to laugh, because he never shut off the faucet of his emotions. So we describe that day of return, when that dream that he had, that great dream, Hayinu kecholmim, then our mouths will be able to be filled with laughter. And the nations, he was cast among the nations, like the Jews were cast among the nations. Say, Higdil Hashem lasas amela. Yosef hu hamashbir bar l'chol oretz. Yosef changes the world, just as the role of the Jewish people who were sent into exile to change the world. And we could look at ourselves and say, that was the purpose of being planted, hayinu smechim. Or as the seer of Lublin, the Chayes of Lublin once said, why? And the Jews will say, Higdil Hashem lasas imanu. You know why? Says the holy Chayes of Lublin, because hayinu smechim. Because we never allowed ourselves to fall into despair. We always held on to that core joy, to that core faith, to that core conviction. So we say, Shuva Hashem eshviseinu ka'afikim b'negev. Hazoyrim b'dima. There was plants planted with tears, but it's harvested with great joy. Yaakov, the patriarch of all the Jewish people, noisei meshech hazara. And then when Yaakov comes down to Egypt, what happens? He walks around, the same walking around with joy. Now he's carrying all the alumais. Which ones? The ones of Yosef and the ones of all the brothers. At last, all the sheaves. Those sheaves that once bowed down to Yosef, they're now all united. There is a single family that's united. The picture came to a completion, to a closure. Noisei, the same one who carried the seeds, is now carrying all the bundles. Remember, the bundles are not only bundles, the bundles are also people. He's now carrying all of them together. This is the image that the psalmist wanted us to envision, to understand the cycle, the transformation from exile into redemption, from planting with tears and harvesting with joy. May it be speedily in our days already this Tisha B'Av. Amen. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Amen.